In recent months, the United States has witnessed a troubling surge in immigration enforcement operations, reaching into communities long believed to be safe. Across the country, refugees and asylum seekers, many of whom fled violence, war, and political persecution, now live in fear of unexpected encounters with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE. Once seen as a shield for national security, ICE's methods are increasingly being questioned for their ethical boundaries, psychological toll, and devastating human cost. In towns across America, especially in culturally rich yet economically vulnerable neighborhoods, ICE raids have become synonymous with unannounced heartbreak. No-knock arrests, workplace ambushes, and early morning door bangs tear through families like shockwaves. Children are left waiting at bus stops with no one to pick them up. Breadwinners vanish without a trace. Community centers, churches, and shelters report growing fear, even among those with legal protection or pending asylum claims. And in many of these cases, the justification lies buried deep in bureaucracy and coded reports, far from the human faces at the center of these tragedies. Minnesota, often portrayed as a sanctuary of inclusivity, has not been spared. A state with a large Somali refugee population, many of whom fled civil war and endured years in camps before arriving on American soil, has suddenly become a hotspot for immigration enforcement. In cities like Minneapolis and St. Cloud, fear is growing. Unmarked vehicles prowl residential blocks. Detainees disappear into holding facilities, often without immediate legal counsel or medical support. And ICE's justification? Routine enforcement. But to the people living here, it doesn't feel routine. It feels personal. The Somali community, already navigating the difficulties of cultural integration, language barriers, and systemic discrimination, now faces a new kind of terror. Parents hesitate to send their children to school. Mosques report declining attendance. Social service workers are overwhelmed with calls for legal aid and emotional support. It is a crisis not just of policy, but of conscience. And yet, for many Americans, this turmoil remains invisible, buried beneath headlines or distorted by politics. What happens when a nation turns its back on those it once promised refuge? The story begins right here. On a quiet Monday morning in early June, in the heart of St. Cloud, Minnesota, everything seemed ordinary. The sun rose slowly over the rows of apartment complexes and modest houses that many Somali families called home. Children prepared for school, mothers packed lunches, and fathers, some working night shifts, tried to catch a few hours of sleep. The neighborhood buzzed with the rhythm of everyday life, a fragile normalcy delicately balancing decades of resilience. But beneath that calm surface, something had shifted. In the early hours before dawn, unmarked SUVs began appearing on neighborhood streets. Parked at strange angles, they waited, dark, still, and watching. Inside were ICE agents, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying government-issued badges, radioing quietly in clipped tones, a list in hand, a name circled. At 6:13 a.m., the first door was knocked, then banged. A father of three, Mohamed Nur, a 47-year-old refugee who had lived in the U.S. for nearly 18 years, opened the door. He wore a t-shirt and pajama pants. His green card application was still pending, tangled in administrative backlogs. He had no criminal record. His children, ages 6 to 12, stood behind him, confused, frightened, still clutching their cereal bowls. Within moments, he was handcuffed and taken away, his children screaming in disbelief. His wife, Samira, tried to follow, but was held back. "It's a civil warrant," one of the agents mumbled, not meeting her eyes. No explanation was given. No lawyer was allowed on site. No translator was present. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next 48 hours, more than a dozen similar arrests took place in the same area. Men and women taken from homes, gas stations, job sites, and parking lots. Most of them were Somali refugees. Most of them had lived in the United States for more than a decade. Many were waiting on immigration court backlogs or had pending applications for status adjustment. None had violent criminal histories. Word spread quickly within the community. WhatsApp groups lit up with alerts. "Don't open the door. ICE spotted near the mosque. They took Ibrahim." Panic turned into paralysis. Parents skipped work. Kids stayed home. The streets emptied by noon. For local advocates and community leaders, it was clear that this was not random enforcement, something coordinated, targeted, and deeply chilling was unfolding. Right in plain sight, Samira still remembers the sound of the door slamming shut behind her husband. It echoes in her mind like a nightmare that won't end. That morning, everything changed. She sat on the living room floor for hours after ICE left, clutching her youngest daughter, Layla, who cried until her voice gave out. Mohamed Nur wasn't just her husband, he was the glue that held their family together. And just like that, he was gone. Mohamed came to the U.S. in 2007 after fleeing Somalia during the peak of the Civil War. He spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya before receiving approval through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. He arrived in Minnesota with a suitcase, a fluent command of 5 languages, and a determination to rebuild his life. Over the years, he worked jobs nobody else wanted: janitorial work, graveyard shifts at meatpacking plants, back-breaking hours driving trucks through the winter. He never complained. He never once got in trouble with the law. He paid taxes, raised children, and volunteered at the local community center, where he helped newcomers translate documents, apply for housing, and navigate school enrollment for their children. The Nur family wasn't just surviving. They were slowly, painfully making it in America. But none of that mattered when ICE arrived. In the following days, Samira received only a single phone call from Mohamed. He had been taken to a detention facility 3 hours away, where he was being held without bond. The reason? A long-expired asylum case from over a decade ago that had never been properly closed, despite years of compliance and appearances at immigration check-ins. It was a clerical error, one the system had quietly ignored until now. The children didn't understand. Layla asked every night, "When is Baba coming back?" Her older brother, Yusuf, tried to act strong, but he stopped eating. Their middle daughter, Amal, who once dreamed of being a nurse, began having nightmares, waking up crying in Somali. Samira tried to hold the family together. But with Mohamed gone, income vanished, and fear crept into every corner of their life. Neighbors brought over groceries. The local imam helped find a lawyer. But the process was slow, painful, and dehumanizing. Every hearing was delayed. Every document needed translation. And each day, the children slipped deeper into anxiety. This isn't just a story about one man being detained. It's a story about what happens when a system loses sight of the people it claims to regulate. A father was taken. A family collapsed. The community watched and waited for someone to say this was wrong. No one did. The arrest of Mohamed Nur was not an anomaly. It was part of a documented escalation in immigration enforcement that, when examined alongside national data, reveals a chilling pattern. According to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, TRAC at Syracuse University, ICE arrests of individuals without criminal records rose by nearly 30% in the past fiscal year. In Minnesota alone, ICE conducted over 1,400 non-criminal removals in the last 12 months, a number that experts believe is significantly underreported due to lack of transparency. A closer look at ICE's enforcement memos shows a shift from risk-based targeting to expedited enforcement sweeps, particularly in communities with large refugee or immigrant populations. Internal documents leaked by whistleblowers and confirmed by independent investigations show that Somali communities in Minneapolis, St. Cloud, and Rochester were listed in priority raid zones, often justified by vague national security concerns rather than case-by-case evaluations. These designations were made without community consultation or public notification. Moreover, legal pathways that once provided hope, such as temporary protected status, TPS, DACA expansions, or asylum reopenings, have become entangled in bureaucracy. TRAC data shows that the average wait time for an immigration court hearing has ballooned to over 4.2 years nationally, with some Minnesota cases delayed until 2027. During that time, individuals can be detained, deported, or barred from reentry simply due to procedural technicalities. In Mohamed's case, his asylum file had been dormant for over a decade. He had submitted paperwork, attended required check-ins, and even renewed his work permit consistently. But a 2024 ICE audit flagged his case as inactive but removable, a designation based more on database automation than any actual threat assessment. When the raid was launched, no officer had spoken to his attorney, reviewed his children's legal status, or verified his pending green card application. He became a data point, not a man. Human rights monitors have long warned about the growing automation of deportation processes. Algorithms now flag removal priorities based on cross-agency data, which often lacks nuance or accuracy. As a result, long-settled refugees with community ties and no record are swept into the same dragnet as those with recent criminal convictions or immigration fraud. The effect? Entire neighborhoods live in fear. Children develop trauma-related symptoms. Schools report declining attendance. And legal clinics struggle to keep up with emergency filings for detainees pulled in with little warning. What the data shows, clearly, undeniably, is that the enforcement system is no longer just catching those who break the law. It is targeting those who trusted it, complied with it, and believed that being honest would protect them. Instead, they were betrayed by the very numbers meant to ensure fairness. The arrest of Mohamed Nur and hundreds like him opens the door to a deeper ethical debate that America continues to struggle with. What does it mean to enforce the law when the law itself lacks humanity? At the heart of the ICE raids in Minnesota lies a polarizing question. Is adherence to immigration codes more important than compassion, context, or community? Supporters of ICE operations argue that no one is above the law. They point to statutes, deadlines, and court decisions that authorize the agency to detain individuals whose immigration status is unresolved or expired. From their perspective, agents are simply doing their jobs, carrying out congressional mandates under difficult political pressure. If we start making exceptions, where do we draw the line? One retired ICE official said in a 2024 panel discussion, "The moment you let emotions override the law, the system collapses." This logic, on the surface, holds institutional consistency. After all, nations rely on rules. But what happens when those rules ignore the human beings entangled in them? Critics of ICE, including civil rights organizations and legal scholars, argue that enforcement without context becomes oppression. In Mohammed's case, he was complying with the legal process, had deep family and community ties, and posed no threat to public safety. Yet his life was upended because of a procedural lapse, a missed administrative closure from over 10 years ago. Is that justice? Furthermore, the disproportionate targeting of Somali refugees in Minnesota raises red flags of racial and ethnic profiling. Reports from local attorneys reveal that nearly 80% of those detained in recent raids were from East African backgrounds, despite similar immigration irregularities existing in other communities. How can such selective enforcement be justified under the banner of national security? There's also the question of moral consistency. If America claims to be a nation of immigrants and human rights, how can it justify separating families at dawn without warning or due process? If ICE agents are trained to follow orders, do they bear responsibility for the outcomes of those orders? History has shown us time and again that just following protocol is no shield against ethical accountability. At the intersection of legality and morality lies a silent conflict, one that courts rarely address and politicians often avoid. Can a policy be legal but still deeply unjust? Can a country claim moral leadership while quietly deporting fathers like Mohammed? These questions don't have easy answers, but they demand to be asked, especially when lives are torn apart in the name of order. The soul of a nation isn't defined by its laws alone, but by the humanity it shows in how it chooses to enforce them. The human cost of the ICE raids in Minnesota ripples far beyond the holding cells and courtroom hearings. For families like Mohamed Nur's, the impact is immediate and deeply personal. But for the broader Somali community, the damage is systemic, etched into daily routines, social networks, and collective memory. Since the raids began, attendance at community events has plummeted. Somali-owned businesses, which once served as gathering places and cultural anchors, report sharp declines in foot traffic. One local cafe owner in St. Cloud shared that he had to close early every day for 2 weeks straight. Customers too afraid to leave their homes, fearing they might not return. Mosques now see fewer worshipers at Friday prayers. Even children hesitate to attend school, worried that their parents might not be there when they come home. Social workers and trauma counselors report a surge in cases involving anxiety, sleeplessness, and emotional withdrawal among both adults and children. It's not just fear, one therapist explains. It's a profound sense of betrayal. These are people who waited in line, filled out every form, believed in the system, and then the system turned on them without warning. Local schools have been forced to take on roles far beyond education. Teachers spend hours calming children who burst into tears at the sound of a knock on the classroom door. One first-grade student wet himself after hearing police sirens outside, convinced ICE had come for his family. School administrators coordinate with legal aid groups to offer Know Your Rights sessions, hoping to arm families with knowledge in place of security. Meanwhile, community organizations are stretched to their limits. Legal clinics scramble to submit emergency stays of removal, while volunteers drive hours across the state to visit detainees who can't afford a lawyer. But the immigration courts are backlogged, and justice moves slowly, too slowly for families running out of time, rent money, and hope. And for those already deported, like Mohammed's brother-in-law Ibrahim, the consequences are even more severe. He was sent back to Somalia, a country he hadn't seen in 22 years. Within weeks of arrival, he was assaulted and robbed. He now hides in a compound, afraid to go outside, awaiting paperwork from a UN agency that may or may not arrive. These are not isolated stories. They are the lived reality of hundreds, possibly thousands, across America. The ICE raids don't just deport people. They dismantle the invisible infrastructure that holds families, communities, and futures together. The damage is silent, but devastating. And when the dust settles, what remains is not safety, but silence. A silence that speaks volumes about the cost of forgetting that laws, without humanity, can destroy more than they protect. Late at night, Samira often finds herself staring at the front door, half expecting it to open, half fearing it might. The house is quieter now. The laughter is gone. The rhythm of daily life, the soft murmur of Mohammed reciting evening prayers, the clink of dishes as the family shared dinner, the hum of children doing homework, is no longer there. What remains is a hollow space filled with waiting. In moments like these, the questions begin to surface. How did we get here? How did a country that promised sanctuary come to embrace fear as a policy? For refugees who fled war and persecution, America was supposed to be the end of the struggle, not the beginning of a new one. The deeper tragedy is not just that the system failed, it's that it convinced good people that this failure was acceptable. That Mohammed's detention is just a statistic, that his children's trauma is unfortunate but inevitable, that following the rules of a flawed system is more important than questioning the morality behind them. History teaches us that injustice often hides behind procedures, that cruelty can be silent, incremental, and bureaucratic. But it also teaches us that moments of reckoning come when the people affected by injustice and those willing to witness it raise their voices and refuse to look away. Samira's children have begun to ask difficult questions about justice, about America, about their place in it. Why did they take Baba if he didn't do anything wrong? Layla asked one night. Samira didn't have an answer, but she knows the question matters. It forces us to confront what kind of society we are building and for whom. Are laws meant to protect people or punish them? Is safety defined by walls and raids or by empathy and inclusion? Can a nation be secure without sacrificing its soul? Philosophers often say a just society is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. If that's true, then what does it say about us when we detain fathers, deport neighbors, and traumatize children, all in the name of enforcement? The story of Mohamed Nur is not just his own. It is a mirror, held up to a country at a crossroads. What we see in it depends not just on policy, but on conscience. And the time to choose who we are, what we stand for, is not tomorrow. It is now. If you've made it this far, then you already know this isn't just one story. It's a window into hundreds of lives quietly unraveling, far from the spotlight. Mohamed Nur could be your neighbor, your coworker, the man who delivers your groceries or drives your child's school bus. But in the eyes of an indifferent system, he's a file number, a removal order, a case closed. It doesn't have to be this way. Change doesn't begin in courtrooms or policy chambers. It begins with awareness, with outrage, with empathy. It begins with the simple act of refusing to look away. You have the power to be part of that change. Share this story. Talk about Mohamed Nur. Talk about Samira. Talk about children waiting for parents who may never come home. Let their names become louder than the silence ICE depends on. Support immigrant-led organizations. Donate to legal aid groups. Call your representatives and demand humane immigration reform. Ask hard questions. Why are we detaining those who followed the rules? Who benefits from this fear? And how many more families have to break before we say enough? We cannot undo what happened to Mohamed, but we can fight to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Post this video. Use your voice. Use your platform, whether it's a classroom, a podcast, a kitchen table, or a social feed. Let people know the cost of silence. Every action matters. Every share is a shield. Every conversation is a spark. Because the next time a father like Mohamed opens his door to a knock in the dark, maybe, just maybe, he won't be alone. And maybe justice won't just be a word we use. It'll be something we defend. Together.